Hello everyone and welcome to Ruff Kutz, where we cut to the chase. We join you here each and every second Saturday of the month to talk to you about issues related to faith, family, and fatherhood. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell, and I am the Executive Director of Fathers Incorporated, and to my right is Lamont Jones. He is the Director of Furthering Fathering, and to my left, my lovely wife. She's mine, y'all. Keep your eyes and channels on to yourself. This is Miss Tracy Braswell, and she is the COO at Fathers Incorporated. And so, welcome to Ruff Kutz. We got a new set thing happening right now. You know, we tinkering, and so we're going to get it. You'll probably change even more and more over the next few months as we get it closer to what I'm trying to make it look like. As you can see, we're trying to make sure that we have that barbershop feel. And so, but have barbershop style discussions here on Ruff Kutz. Topic this month, the heart of a father. And so, you know, we talk a lot when it comes to responsible fatherhood about the heart. We believe that the heart holds significance in this conversation. Either your heart is wounded, it is healed, or it is good. But I think when it comes to relationships, it is always an issue of the heart. But more specifically and more significantly, when it comes to faith, you know, God has a special place in his heart for the heart. And so there are several references throughout the Bible where God talks about the heart of man. One in particular is Malachi 4:6, where it says, "And he shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse." We're going to talk about the heart first, and then when we come back on the other side, we're going to talk about the smite and the curse. Because we don't typically, when I've heard that scripture, people kind of gloss over the part that God said, if it don't happen, you know, I'm going to smite you with a curse. We tend to ignore that. But Lamont, I wanted to touch, you have a curriculum under Furthering Fathering called the Heart Curriculum.
Yes.
Why?
Because we know in the conversation with fathers, we have to get to the heart. We have to take the time, though, and build that safe place, build that safety net that you can trust me with your words, and now I can share my heart with you. And we know, you know, Ken, doing this work, when I first heard you reference, you can't get to the issue of a dad until you know how they're thinking, right? Because Scripture says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So we have to know why. Why are they feeling the way they're feeling? So our curriculum is designed to get to their heart so that we can give them the adequate, safe place and time so that they can wrestle with those issues and get them out. Because now once they're out, we could deal with them. But as long as they keep them hidden, buried, suppressed, you know, those are all the dynamics that we are challenged with when we're talking, doing the fatherhood work. But once they can get them out, we know that we can help them walk them through those issues, and that's what's key.
Okay. You know, we are extremely intentional on Ruff Kutz about ensuring that there is the voice of a woman in this conversation, because it is significant to this conversation. We don't have as men, we don't have the only perspective to fatherhood. We might be the initiators of fathering, right? However, there is someone in receipt of that fathering, and it's not just boys. Sometimes it's women and girls as well. But I want to kind of flip back a little bit to the faith side of this conversation about fathers and the heart in terms of God's whole notion about the significance of the word heart. Talk about that a little bit.
So there's a scripture that many of us are probably familiar with, and it comes from Matthew 15:18. And it says, "But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them." And the significance of that particular scripture, it kind of pinpoints the heart is really the condition of our spiritual being. And what comes out of our mouth is just a reflection of what's embedded deeply within our hearts. And as fathers, as parents, when we have a bad heart condition, it shows up in our children. It shows up in how we parent.
A bad
or how
heart
we
condition.
don't. Right.
Wow.
Right. So we just have to be mindful that the heart, it speaks volumes. I believe the heart is how God hears us. So there's some things that sometimes we say, but God knows our hearts. You know, people say that lightly. God knows my heart. And I always say, yes, he does. Because he really does. So we can fake it to other folks, but what we can't do is fake it with our Father in heaven, because he hears our hearts. And ironically enough, the word hear is in the word heart. The word ear is in the word heart. And I believe that God hears our heart more than he hears what we say out of our mouth, because he knows the condition of our heart. And the only way that mankind can potentially know the condition of our heart is what flows out of our mouth.
Right.
Wow. And you know what? As you were saying that, I was thinking, that's probably the one thing that we can't do. You can't fake your heart.
No.
Cannot.
You can fake what you say. You can gloss over what your heart is feeling.
Right.
You might even be thinking something, but at the end of the day, I think that is why God has such a significance on the heart, because you can't fake that.
You cannot.
You know, no matter what you're thinking, you know, it's in your heart. You know, we have a progressive change model in Fathers Incorporated that says that if I want to impact what you're doing, I have to impact how you're thinking.
Right.
If I want to impact how you're thinking, I have to find out how you're feeling. Once I know how a man feels, I can change how he thinks. Once I change how he thinks, I can change what he does. And so the depth of our work is in the heart. But the heart is also the space that causes most of the chaos in our work as well, particularly when you're talking about fatherlessness, right? Because that is where we are now dealing with hardened hearts, right? And so when you look at scripture, particularly one of my favorite passages where Moses is dealing with Pharaoh, and he keeps sending Moses back to Pharaoh. And each time he sends Moses back to Pharaoh, the end of the scripture says, and he hardened his heart. And I always take that to believe that God knew that if he did not harden Pharaoh's heart, he probably would have gave up after the first plague. I know I would have. I wouldn't have had to see frogs and all that other stuff that was coming. I would have gave up at the first sense. But in order for God to make his point, he had to harden Pharaoh's heart so that he could make the point that what's going to happen with the people of Israel is going to be at the hand of God, not at the hand of Moses.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so when you think about the significance of the heart in that manner, particularly in this space about harden, why is it such a issue when a man's heart is hardened?
One of the things that just came to mind was that our mind and our lens is colored by the condition of our heart. So in the heart lies all of that junk. How does it get out? Yeah, we facilitate these sessions, but we know when the heart is being changed, that's a move of God. We allow God to have that space, and now we move according to what's next. And most of the time, because we want to share from our expertise platform, sometimes God just wants you to be still. Give that man 5 more minutes, because under those layers, he may be dealing with abandonment. He may be dealing with molestation. Whatever that is, we want that to come out. But fatherlessness is, that's my lens. I look at the work that we do because of my abandonment issues. So I had to heal myself, and that's a process. We talk about the heart. Reconciliation is key, and that's one of the components in that heart curriculum. What is reconciling? That means 2 people. But that second person that we have you reconcile with isn't present. We have you write that letter of reconciliation, because the heart has to begin to heal.
You know, and when he talks about the heart, when God talks about the heart, you know, I always believe that whenever I see the word man in the Bible, that you have to distinguish when he's talking about man and when he's talking about mankind, right? Because mankind has a heart,
That's right.
right? And then we also have to pay attention to the heart of a woman when it comes to a man as well. When we're thinking and having this conversation about fathers, Tracy, where does the heart of a woman fit into this conversation?
So as you all were having that conversation, what I was thinking of was that sometimes we have to pay attention to the hurting heart. It's not always a hardened heart. Sometimes the heart is hardened because it's been hurting. And so the hardened portion of it is a protective measure. But most of the times I feel with people, it's a hurting heart that does need to be healed. And one of the things in terms of a woman, in Proverbs, it talks about making sure that a woman safely protects the heart of the man, her husband particularly, because once that heart has been hurt, it's very difficult for a man to be able to come back from that and be able to trust the woman. So we as women have to be mindful, and it works both ways. But it's very interesting that the Bible specifically is speaking to the virtuous woman who says, you gotta help his heart stay healthy. Is basically the way I interpret that. Because if you don't, then that whole relationship falls apart. And so there is some responsibility in women in where we've got to help nurture the man's heart.
You know, I think that we kind of, we dismissed this conversation in a couple of shows back. We were kind of talking about the issue of nurturing, you know, and nurturing is always attached to the heart, and hearts are always attached to emotion.
Right.
And so emotion is articulated very differently from women than it is from men. When we come back on the other side of this break, I want to dig a little deeper into this Malachi 4:6, because it talks about the heart being turned to the children and the children being turned back to the hearts of their fathers. But there's a consequence when it doesn't happen. And I think that in our communities today, we are dealing with the consequence of hardened and hurting hearts.
Absolutely.
And so when we come back on the other side, we're going to talk a little more about this healing, hurting, and hardened hearts of man. Be right back with you.
Dad, look! Let's go ziplining! Daddy, come here! Let's go race car driving! Daddy, let's go alligator wrestling!
KJ! Hand me that. Now this is the way you make a moment.
You don't have to be a superhero to be a super dad. Every dad has a daddy power. Join the movement. Drive to 5. A campaign to equip dads for maximum performance in the 0 through 5 years.
What's Beethoven's favorite fruit? Banana. How does a tissue dance? Put a little boogie on it.
Welcome back to Ruff Kutz, where we cut to the chase. I'm your host, Kenneth Braswell, and my guests today, Lamont Jones and Tracy Braswell, and we're talking about the heart of a father. And when we closed out on our last break, we kind of ended with this phrase of hurting, healing, and hardened hearts. And so I read to you earlier a scripture in Malachi 4:6 that reads, "And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse." And we often kind of talk about, this, and not to digress, but I will just for a quick second. It reminds me of when Abel was in the ground and he said, "Are you my brother's keeper?" And then he says, there's a verse that comes after that says, his blood will cry out from the ground. And every time I think about that, it is consequence to me, which is because we are not serving as our brother's keepers, it is the blood of the ground that's crying out to us to show up as men. To pay attention to our fathers, pay attention to our brothers. In the same sense, I think that this verse is equivalent to that when it talks about fathers, that God is saying, this is your mandate. As a dad, this is your mandate. You are in control of this. And if you don't deal with this, there's going to be a curse. And we know what the curse is right now. Literally, we know it is in the level of fatherlessness that we are experiencing throughout our communities, particularly in our low-income communities. Lamont, talk a little bit about, as you do this work, we all do this work, but expound a little bit on the curse. What do you see happening in our community today as a result of fatherlessness?
Big, man. That's big. And again, if we own it, if we fathers would just own it, our absenteeism in the family is a contribution of lack of strong black male leadership in the community, starting with our homes. We have to own that. And that curse is, we didn't teach our sons how to be godly men. We didn't teach them how to respect a woman. We were not present to show our daughters how they should be treated by a young man. So this is the curse. And in Malachi, it speaks to the father first. We can talk to the young men all we want, but it speaks to the father first. It says, fathers turn the hearts of the fathers back to their children. So that's our work, and we're committed to that. But the curse is the effects of incarceration, dropout rate, girls having sex, all of that, again, that's the lens that we see the work that we do. So it's all a contribution. And this is part of that curse that we're living out in this century.
But it's interesting that, and you bring up a great point, that the scripture speaks to fathers. And God's not talking to moms. Like, God's not saying that he has to turn the hearts of moms back to the children and the hearts of children back to the moms. What do we glean from that?
So my thought on that is this. Let's go back to Genesis, where the first consequence occurred.
Okay.
So God gives a mandate, tells Adam what we can and cannot do. Eve goes, partakes of the tree that she should not partake of, and the first consequence is literally separation from God. And then there's also now the introduction of death. And so in our communities, what we're seeing is the death of families. We're seeing the death of traditions that have, in the past, have been instrumental in us being able to raise the children the way that they should be. We're seeing the loss of hope in our communities. We're seeing the loss of dreams in our communities. So we kind of have to start there, because that was the first consequence that we had, which was separation, and then there was just death. And so that is the repercussion of, that's what we're seeing played out in our communities now. We're literally seeing death being played out right before our eyes. It's not just a physical death, it's a spiritual death that our children, unfortunately, are paying the price for because of the acts of the forefathers, so to speak. The reason why I believe that God is speaking specifically to fathers is because in Genesis, he laid out the game plan as the father, as the creator. And he provided. We kind of talked about this the last time that one of our previous shows, we talked about God being the provider. And God literally laying the groundwork and says, this is how you should be as a father. And so I believe that that's why he goes back and speaks to the fathers, because we have to love in fatherly ways. Even as a woman, there's a certain amount of love. There's an agape love that God has for us. So what God is saying to us is that we're no longer acting in the manner in which we should be. So therefore, there is now a curse upon you. And there's always going to be a curse as long as we deviate from what the original plan was.
How much of the motherhood, fatherhood conversation is being oppressed because of the masculinity, femininity conversation? Because here's what I'm hearing from both of you, is that God is talking to fathers, and we're clear that he's talking to fathers. But we are currently in an atmosphere, right, to which it is very difficult to talk about anything masculine, right, including fathers. Because there is a movement, a Me Too movement, right, that is speaking to an issue that we have to address, right? And it is the disparities, it is all the things that our women are going through in the society, and we are in full support of all of those things.
Absolutely.
But there's a notion of us too, right? And so all of us are going through something. How do we balance that conversation? Because that, to me, tends to be the issue, which is how do we work at the issues that are impacting our children, but impacting our children from the standpoint of being mothers and fathers, because we can't get beyond the man-woman conversation.
So the challenge that we're having right now is in this political atmosphere that we have, it's either you agree with me or you're my enemy. And I think that that is what our main challenge is right now, is that we've gotten to a space now where we can no longer agree to disagree. So we can no longer be on opposite sides and still be friends. So therefore, in order for me to look good, I've got to make you look bad. And so therefore, if I as a woman want to uplift myself, if I want to be recognized in this Me Too movement, then what I've got to do is I've got to break you down. I've got to diminish your value. Instead of realizing, and this is where we've just got to get back to, we've got to realize that, particularly in our community, we don't have time to diminish each other's value. We've already been diminished as a culture enough. We have got to lift up one another, and we've got to support one another, and we just can't embrace what's going on culturally in this political climate that's been going on. We have just got to. That's not for us. We've got to support our men. We've got to pat them on the back and say, hey, good job. We've got to, as women, have to get rid of this notion that all men are bad fathers and that they're just no good. And a lot of that, unfortunately, comes from media. That's what we see on Ratchet TV. Is that, there are no men that are good out there. There are no men that are taking care of their children. Because of the work that we do, we know that that is absolutely not correct. But that's what's being portrayed. And so we've now got to reach back, because this is a seed, unfortunately, that we've sown. We've now got to reach back, and we've got to begin to start teaching our younger generation the real facts. We've got to, not the facts. We've got to teach them the truth. Today we learned that there is a huge difference between facts and truth. Truth never changes. Facts can be changed.
That was good right there. That was a show ender right there. Being spiritual beings in an earthly world, what is the on-ramp in the pulpit to this conversation? Because this is not a conversation that's taking place in our churches, right? For several different reasons. But let's just help them with the on-ramp conversation. What is that? How does this conversation take place in our churches?
The on-ramp begins with the honor of the men in the church, the honor of the father.
Right.
It's just, as Tracy said, putting that conversation back in its right perspective. Let's go back to Genesis, we've all fallen short. So when we strip everyone of their titles and accomplishments, it's just you and I. We're just having this conversation. Now, the on-ramp can begin with the honor from the pulpit, but the on-ramp is also the pastor with an accountability system, because how he pastored and loved that church should be how he pastored and loved his family. It should be symbolic.
Wow.
And also, it should fall right with the leadership. And that's the work that we can always go in and help them with.
Yeah, in my conversations, I've said that, there's two different conversations. There's a conversation of reality, and there's a conversation of clarity, right? The conversation of reality is, let's just take a hard conversation. So Bill Cosby, right? And I know people just shuddered when I said it. Right?
I might have shuddered.
Yeah. Your hearts even shuddered, right? And so the conversation of reality is there's some things that we know,
Right.
and some things that we don't know.
Right.
The things that we know, he is accountable for, and he has to ride through the whole continuum of justice based on what our laws in this country say they are for the things that we know. The things that we don't know, God will deal with him when he shows up at that gate.
Right.
The conversation of clarity says, let's look at everything we know and everything we don't know, and then make sense out of this in the context of time and the context of issues, which is, how does this sit in our space today? Particularly given the actions that we have done from a social media standpoint in the vilification of him, but as an overall conversation, the vilification of black men. Right? Because now it's open season on black men, not because of what we know, it's because of what we don't know, right? And how do we shift ourselves around and begin to have deeper conversations of reality, because we got to have those conversations, but much deeper conversations of clarity. I believe that that's the hard work, because to your point, everybody wants to talk facts, but no one wants to talk truth. There's truth in clarity and transparency. There ain't no facts in that stuff. You can strip away the facts. But listen, we at the end of the time.
Wow. That went quick.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah. Thank you to my guest, Lamont Jones, Furthering Fathering.
Yes, sir.
And to my beautiful wife, give me a kiss on camera. Tracy Braswell, from Fathers Incorporated. She kissed me so good, I forgot that she was in my organization. So, but you know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you're kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good mentor, Art Mitchell, always said to me, it's nice to be important, but it's much more important to be nice. Until next month, God bless and be safe.